Today, the government is setting out the next steps in our plan to increase housing supply and increase support for first home buyers. New Zealand's housing crisis is long-standing and will take time to turn around. There is no silver bullet, which is why today's suite of measures sit alongside the range of initiatives already undertaken by the government, such as our significantly scaled up state house building program, reform of the RMA, and the foreign buyer ban that have all been aimed at increasing supply and tilting the balance away from speculators towards first home buyers. We've also worked with the Reserve Bank to help take some demand out of the market, and the new LVR rules will complement the demand-side measures Minister Robertson will shortly announce. But despite these measures, the need for further action is clear. The last thing our economy and homeowners needs right now is a dangerous housing bubble, but a number of indicators point towards that risk. Property investors are now the biggest share of buyers, with the highest amount of purchases on record. In the final quarter of 2020, 40% of all property sales were to people who owned multiple properties, and from June to November 2020, the amount borrowed by investors increased by 116%. Between 1991 and 2019, New Zealand house prices had the highest real growth in the OECD at 266%. That rate of growth is unsustainable, and it threatens our economic recovery. While the types of houses we own might have changed, the desire for Kiwis to have security of a safe, warm, dry and affordable home remains unchanged. That is the government's goal too. So this package today seeks to target the specific barriers to making that a reality. First, we need to dampen property speculation. Property investors now make up the biggest share of buyers in the market, and last year 15,000 people bought homes who already own 5 or more. Minister Robertson will set out a set of measures targeted at curbing speculation and closing tax loopholes to make property less lucrative for investors, thereby freeing up space in the market for first home buyers. Second, we need to build more houses. More houses have been consented under this government than any government since the 1970s, and we have the largest government build program in a generation. But more is needed, and we need to ensure the private sector is playing a role too. Through conversations with local government, property developers and iwi, it has become clear that the single biggest thing the government can do to assist house building is support the building of basic infrastructure, such as roads and pipes and drains, to accelerate planned developments. That's why Minister Megan Woods will set out the establishment of a $3.8 billion housing acceleration fund to speed up the delivery of new affordable houses in the short to medium term. This is the largest investment of its kind that we're aware of since the 1970s. So this package contains both urgent measures and long-term solutions. It seeks to de-escalate the current risks in the housing market while setting in action a pipeline of affordable new homes to be built over the coming years. It is a balanced approach, and I'll now hand over to Minister Woods to set out supply-side details. Minister Woods.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good morning, everybody. As we've investigated where the greatest housing needs are and what needs to be done to meet those needs, we've found out just how broken the system is for getting new housing, especially affordable housing, built. There is a clear market failure in getting new houses off the ground, and a significant missing link is ready-to-build land with infrastructure in place. A core belief of our government, as the Prime Minister outlined, is that everybody deserves a warm, dry, secure home, whether they own or rent. We've not only rebuilt the state's mandate to deliver housing during our time in government, but we have also reconstructed its ability to plan, invest and make it possible for housing to be built at scale. It's taught us what is possible when we match up the right land in the right place with good plans and invest in the critical but costly infrastructure that brings roads to our homes and water to the taps in those homes. Before houses can be built, particularly at the scale that we need them, this groundwork must be built and paid for. It's a stumbling block that stops developers and councils in their tracks. It makes housing more expensive and puts councils on a collision course with ratepayers. Nobody wants to pay for it at the pace that is required, and we simply have to find a way to get past this. That is why we've set up this new $3.8 billion Housing Acceleration Fund to fund infrastructure on land we own and in areas where councils can demonstrate both housing need and a willingness for momentum to increase new housing. In addition, Kāinga Ora will be making strategic land purchases to increase the pace, scale and mix of housing developments, including more affordable housing and rental options. We're also responding to rising housing prices to give first homeowners a leg up onto the property ladder, with changes to income caps on our first home products and to regional price caps. This package we're releasing today is unique. Not only does it bring together demand and supply measures, but for the first time since around the 1970s, it brings land and infrastructure investment together and integrates these measures. This package will accelerate the building of new houses in the right place where it's needed most. And I'll now hand over to Minister Robertson to detail the demand-side measures.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. For me, today's announcement is about starting to tilt the balance back to first home buyers and away from speculators. House price increases of the magnitude that we have seen in recent months are not only harmful to affordability, but excessive volatility also can represent a future risk to economic stability. Housing bubbles are unstable by their very nature, and we cannot afford to put the current economic recovery at risk by allowing house prices to spiral out of control. As the Prime Minister has said, there is not one single solution to the housing crisis. It has to be tackled by a range of measures, some led by the government, others by the Reserve Bank, and others by local government and other players in the housing market. One lever that the government does have is on the demand side and through our tax system. So today we are announcing that we will double the Bright Line test originally brought in by the National Party from 5 years to 10 years to reduce the attractiveness of flipping residential homes to speculators. As is already the case, this will not apply to the family home. The average house in New Zealand is owned for 7 to 8 years. Extending the Bright Line test for existing properties to just beyond this mark will capture more speculative investment while protecting investors who have just a single investment property, in effect for many of them as a form of retirement savings, and these properties are often held for longer periods. We are also encouraging the building of new homes by making new builds exempt from the extension of the Bright Line test. The Bright Line extension will apply to property acquired after 3 full working days from today. That is, to be clear, property acquired on or after the 27th of March 2021. We are giving this window in particular recognition to those who are partway through an offer process on a property and to ensure that everyone is aware of the changes we're making. The government is also tidying up a couple of aspects of the operation of the Bright Line test. In particular, creating a mechanism for what happens when there is a change of use of a property, and including properties used as short stay accommodation which are not the place of residence of the owner. A law change is required to make the Bright Line changes, with a supplementary order paper added later today to the annual rates bill, which will be passed under urgency. We have taken this move in response to the rapid escalation in house prices in the last few months. Throughout 2020, and as late as the Treasury's pre-election fiscal update in September last year, we were being advised that house prices would fall as a result of COVID-19, and we were preparing policy in that context. The opposite has occurred, and we have signalled for some time that we now need to take action such as this to respond to the unsustainable house price situation the country now faces. We are also announcing today that the government is ending a tax loophole that favours investors over first home buyers in order to give Kiwis a better shot at owning their own home. Property investment is often funded through large mortgages, with investors allowed to write off interest costs against the income they make from the property, so-called interest deductibility. However, this deduction is not available to homeowners. This loophole has contributed to more speculative demand, which has pushed up house prices. Cabinet has agreed to remove the ability for future property investors to deduct interest expenses from their taxable income. The loophole is also being phased out for existing investors over a 4-year period to give owners time to adjust to the removal of this loophole. I reiterate again, none of these changes affect the family home. Cabinet will consult on the implementation of the deductibility policy, including how to allow new builds in regard to removing the loophole, and given our goal to encourage more new investment in supply. These are significant changes, and to get them right, they will not be formally introduced until 1 October, but they will apply retrospectively to the 27th of March. Aside from these two areas, you will be aware that we made changes to the Reserve Bank's monetary and financial policy remits to ensure that they take into account government policies on sustainable house prices. And as the Prime Minister has already mentioned, the Reserve Bank has already reintroduced loan-to-value ratios, including from 1 May the requirement for a 40% deposit from investors. In addition, I also wrote to the Reserve Bank Governor earlier this year, asking him to provide advice on stopping or limiting interest-only terms for investors and targeted debt-to-income ratios for investors. The Reserve Bank is due to respond in May on these matters. These changes are just part of our ongoing work to make the housing market more accessible, fairer and of better quality. I'll now hand over to Minister Parker to make some remarks.
Thank you, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm just going to say a few brief words about interest deductibility. The current tax rules, in our view, encourage investors and speculators to highly leverage their current investments in order to buy a new one. This drives up prices as it enables investors to outbid first home buyers, but also, and I think sometimes this point is overlooked, they can outbid current homeowners looking to move into a new home. The latest CoreLogic data shows that property investors are now the largest share of home buyers. This has surged in the last year or two, and it's a real concern to us as a government. Removing mortgage interest deductibility for investors alongside the move to the 10-year bright line test will remove this tax advantage that property investors have. New builds will be exempt to help build housing supply. The details of how they will be exempt will be consulted on. We think this will also have benefits to the wider economy, with less speculative investment in existing homes, distorting investment away from the productive sector. If we can reverse that, we are encouraging more investment into the productive sector over time. This will take the heat out of investor demand for existing homes, direct that investment more into new homes and into other forms of productive investment.
Great. Thank you, Minister Parker. So look, what we'll do is we'll take questions from the floor. I'll direct them to whichever minister is responsible. At the conclusion of questions on the housing package, I'm aware that given there won't be another opportunity this morning for a stand-up, I'll be happy to take general questions at that point. Jessica, then I'll go to Gina, then I'll go to Audrey.
Prime Minister, how much are you hoping these measures will dampen the housing market?
Our view is that this will make a difference. We have taken an approach here, though, of using every lever we have. There is no silver bullet to the housing crisis, so we are undertaking activity to both bring down the heat and the demand, but also increase the number of houses being built in New Zealand.
Are you promising that first home buyers will now have a home in reach?
Well, we want our first home buyers to be able to get into the market. And so much of what we're doing today is about them. So we do hope that over time this will make a difference. But we're also clear, this is a complex issue in which there is no one silver bullet. So we are pulling all of the levers we have to make a difference.
Can you make that promise, though?
People who look at this package today will be under no doubt that we are trying to tilt the playing field towards first home buyers, towards those trying to buy a home or change their home away from the rampant demand we've seen from speculators.
Mr. Robertson.
Jenna, and then Audrey, and then Henry.
A 10-year bright line test is, in effect, a capital gains tax. Have you broken your promise not to introduce
And why do you say that? Because we certainly don't see it that way. You know, the Bright Line test was introduced by a national government. We have chosen to extend the period of time it applies to. It was already an existing mechanism. The advice we've had is that it may not be capturing those who are buying as speculators and who are trying to benefit off the heat in the market. So we're choosing to do something about that.
For the election, Minister Robertson, you completely ruled out an extension to the Bright Line test. Why have you extended it?
Yeah, before I hand over to Minister Robertson, you know, we were silent on the Bright Line test, but what is clear to us is that since May, we've seen house prices go up by over 25%. Now, it is incumbent on us as a government that when we see a problem as significant as this, that we have to do something about it, and we have. Minister Robertson.
Yeah. In the election campaign, we told New Zealanders that we would continue to work to address the housing crisis. Labor's policy was clear that we wouldn't introduce any new taxes. You're referring to a specific interview that I did. I was too definitive in my comments in that interview, but what I will endorse is what the Prime Minister has just said. New Zealanders expect us to address the housing crisis, and we are doing that today.
The first time.
If you don't mind, I'll come to Audrey and then I will come back for second question.
It's not the same issue.
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
It was on September 9 that Grant Robertson said there would be no change to the Bright Line test. So is that a broken promise that you are justifying, or do you not class it as a broken promise?
No, look, I certainly don't. You know, Labor was silent on that question. At that time, we were just not seeing the rampant house price growth that we are now. In fact, during the last year, we were told that house prices would come down, that potentially the housing market could collapse. We have seen the exact opposite. It is incumbent on us to make sure that we as a government are acting responsibly to try and support first home buyers, to act on what we're seeing in the market. So when the advice to us was that we should move on extending the National Party's Bright Line test, we've accepted that and we've done it.
Have you seen any advice that suggests that this will raise rents, particularly if the adaptability changes?
Yeah, look, there's been a mix of advice in that space, but that's why we've been very clear. We need to increase supply. You know, whilst we haven't seen necessarily the same escalation in house price growth translate into rental growth, rent increases, we are very aware of making sure that we don't see that impact in the rental market. Supply will make sure that we buffer against that. So that is why we are asking those who choose to move into the investment property area, help us build houses. That's why we are excluding those new builds from the Bright Line extension and interest deductibility changes, because we want to encourage people who are choosing investment properties to build new ones.
Is there advice that shows that when you ratchet in all investment property over those 5 years?
Yeah, and we'll be releasing the advice, so you'll see that. But it's fair to say there's been a mixture, and it's been hard to really get a sense of what might happen there. But as I say, we have not seen the house price growth that we've seen translate into rent increases in the same degree. So it has been a house price problem.
Do you agree that you've essentially doubled the effective capital gains tax rate that Labor took to the 2011 and 2014 elections, which was a flat rate of 15%? This is an effective rate of 33 to 39%.
I have not seen any political party term the Bright Line test in that way.
Look,
for Megan Woods, this Housing Accelerator Fund, if you're a council, you're keen to get a development up, when can you get cash in hand to start sticking in roads and pipes in the ground and drains?
So Cabinet has already agreed in principle some criteria around the fund and what that will be. So Council, iwi and Māori groups, it will be on a contestable basis that will require some commitments from third parties. They're not necessarily all monetary. There could be some showing the same willingness for momentum around housing that we share, and fundamentally what we need to see is a commitment to increasing housing supply. We'll be going back to Cabinet at the end of June with the detailed criteria around that. Now we've made the announcement, we can work more closely with those partners. We expect in the second half of this year that we'd be able to start seeing the first of that money out the door.
I expect that grants will be made in the second half of this
They'll be beginning. Well, obviously, some will take longer than others, depending on the stage. One of the advantages we have with this package is that we have spent the last 3 years building really strong partnerships through our urban growth partnerships with both iwi and local government in our areas of greatest housing need. So we're not starting from square one in terms of our understanding of what the needs are, but we'll need to work through with individual councils on that. But we fully expect that it should be the end of this year.
Depends on the readiness, of course, of some of those partners too. But we had a local government forum very recently where we talked in very general terms around whether or not levers like this would make a difference and how we could move on an initiative like this quite quickly. As it happens, I'm meeting the heads of local government New Zealand this afternoon. It is fair to say we want to move at pace, but it will also be dependent on their ability to move at pace too.
And Luke, sorry, just further to that, Luke, on the land that we own ourselves, that some of this will apply to that, we'll be able to get that out the door even quicker.
The increase in property price caps for Auckland, Wellington going up 650,000 for Wellington, is that really enough when you see a one-bedroom glorified shipping container in Miramar going for 700?
Minister Woods, it's actually, so those increases are actually based on the medium price within the lower quartile. So we use core logic data at existing house price sales, and we've used the most recent data to establish those caps. So they're not taken from nowhere, they're actually taken as a snapshot from the existing housing market in those regions.
Look, I don't have any more to add to except to say that we've used for our assessment the March 2021 data on that. So it's not just an arbitrary number, it's based on a methodology.
Yeah.
Can you share examples on those?
Bernard, and then I'll come to Jason.
What advice do you have on exactly how many houses extra will be built because of this package, and also what might happen to house prices?
Yeah, so of course it is dependent so much on the partnerships that we see develop as a result of this package. It's in the order of tens of thousands though. Minister Woods, do you want to elaborate on?
So the estimates, and as the Prime Minister said, it is highly dependent on the partnerships that come out of it and the contestable aspect of the package, but the modelling we have suggests between 80 to 130,000 houses over a long period of time. This is over a 20-year pipeline. What we know from the land we own ourselves, if we take some of our large-scale projects, for example, the ability to do further intensification on that land, that we'd see our ability to build around 18,000 more houses on that land, with another 11,000 market houses being enabled on that land. Yeah.
Just to be clear, of course, just to be clear, we are taking the responsibility for providing a fund that helps with the roads, the pipes, the infrastructure. What happens on the land will be highly dependent on the region, the developers, iwi Māori relationships. All of that work sits beyond us. So in terms, that's a modelled number.
That is a modelled number.
Does this package actually increase the state house bill?
No, this isn't the public housing planned. This is the land that sits beneath the houses in terms of our ability to build. One of the conversations that we've been having really closely, whether it be with councils, whether it with iwi, with Māori groups, is the biggest impediment to actually being able to build the houses is actually having build-ready land. The reality is we could rezone every bit of New Zealand that currently doesn't have a house on it, but unless we're investing in the infrastructure to sit under that we won't build houses. The funding for the State House build came through the last budget, through to 2020.
Prime Minister.
Okay, I'll come to Jason, then Ben.
You've mentioned, and Minister Robertson as well, the word bubble, which obviously has serious economic implications. What were the modelling suggest would happen to the New Zealand economy and the housing sector if you hadn't intervened today?
Well, I mean, it's, as I said in my earlier comments, we know that inherently a bubble is unstable and can be a threat to the kind of economic recovery we're seeing at the moment. I'm not saying that there is one. What we're doing today is stepping in to prevent one. I don't have a specific number, Jason, on that, but what I would say is that New Zealand's economic recovery has been strong relative to the rest of the world. One of the things we're dealing with here is a long-standing complex and big challenge around housing. We've put forward today what I think is a very good package to help address that. We've always said that we will have ongoing investment in housing, and we want to ensure that we don't put ourselves in a position where our overall financial stability is affected in the way that a bubble bursting would.
So, just to pick up what Bernard said, what do you think this package will do to housing prices? What do you want it to do to housing prices?
Okay, of course, what we've been very mindful of is that, yes, we want to make sure that first home buyers get into the market, but we're also aware that that will be the biggest asset that many will ever own. So we want there to be stability. The house price growth that we have seen is unsustainable. It also means that housing is becoming unaffordable and is unaffordable. So we do want to see that moderation back in the market. We want people's wages to be owing that they're able to own a home. But we also don't want a situation where we see massive disruption and the value of people's assets collapse, because that poses its own issues for our economy.
How confident are you that we have the developers able to bring today's package to life?
Yes, well, the fact that the biggest message that local government and developers have sent to us is help with the infrastructure. That is what is holding us back. It's the number one issue that is raised with us by local government. And so we have responded today by saying we understand that your rating abilities are limited, that your ability to draw down loans is limited. We can play a role here to help with that infrastructure. So that says that they actually are ready, in some places ready to go, were it not for this issue.
At the scale that we need them to be ready though?
Yeah. Well, of course, consents are at record numbers. We know people are working to try and get that pipeline of housing on stream. We are doing everything we can to continue that pipeline of housing, even beyond where those consents currently are. Who hasn't had a question?
Related to that, what's happening with the Residential Development Response Fund? Yeah,
I'll get Minister Woods.
A reference to it being refocused. Is it that the problem it was designed to solve is no longer there? In terms of risk?
Gone in the opposite direction.
So when we set aside the money for that, that was when everybody was expecting a collapse, particularly a collapse in the building of affordable homes. So in parallel to putting together this package, we've been thinking about how we put that alongside it and make it work in an integrated way with this package. That is, of course, money that has already been allocated, so we're not rehashing that today, but we will have more to say on that because we obviously have been doing the work to bring that into line with this package as well.
Sure. Do you know what you're going to be focusing that money on instead?
Well, I think when we first set it up, it was about making sure that we were still seeing the building of affordable houses. Affordability still will be a key focus of the fund, and where we've already signalled that we're also looking at what we can do as a government to stimulate and ensure that we've got the right conditions for long-term stable affordable rentals as well. Yep.
Right. On the interest deductibility front, there seems to be an element of retrospectivity there in this 4-year phase down. Isn't that odious in principle? How do you come to that?
It is retrospective because the issue that we've grappled, and I'll hand over to Minister Parker, but the issue we grappled with is fairness between those who may have been about to purchase a property, in 4 days' time, versus those who bought a property, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 years ago. How do we create fairness in the system? But also, how do we do that in a way that's smoothed over time? So that's why we've done it. We will be applying it retrospectively over 4 years. And we drew on the experience of the United Kingdom. They've done the same thing. They applied it retrospectively. They did that over a few years. Minister Parker.
I think that's it.
Oh, sorry. If you wanted to refer to the odious bit.
No, look,
just a moment.
To a certain extent, you have to choose a period if you're going to bring everything into line. Otherwise, you have two classes of investment, former investments and new investments, and we thought it was fair to bring everything into the same system eventually. We chose the 4-year period, as the Prime Minister has already said, in part because that's the way in which the United Kingdom government did exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
That's $3.8 billion.
And then I'll come back to you, Gina.
That $3.8 billion, is that mostly geared towards greenfield investment? And if so, doesn't that just increase the challenge of the climate crisis?
No, it's not mostly geared towards greenfield investment. There'll be a mix. One of the things that we do want to bring forward is actually the ability to intensify brownfields land. But I think the critical thing to realise with this fund is that this isn't just about our major urban centres. What this fund will do will shift the development economics so we can start to see development development in Gisborne. We can start to see development in Rotorua. We can start to see development in some of those other towns and cities outside of our main urban centres where we do have an affordability issue with housing, and that there previously hasn't been the funding to do it there.
In fact, something we've learned from the large-scale projects is that actually, even when you are entering into a brownfields, redevelopment, that infrastructure can be a major barrier to increasing the intensification in those areas. And so it's not fair to say that the infrastructure problem is just for new development. Existing areas of land and parcels of land, this is the same problem too.
And I think, I think Tamaki in the redevelopment there is a really good example where you didn't have there wasn't a clear and good understanding of what would be required in infrastructural investment to get the kind of intensification uplift on those brownfield sites. So this is exactly the kind of thing we're trying to avoid.
So that, bringing in the NPS faster or making any other changes to zoning, maybe.
Well, we are leveraging off the NPS, of course, because one of the criteria the Minister has mentioned, if councils want to access this fund, we will be looking to what they're doing, how they're implementing the NPS alongside it.
So in terms of bringing forward when it will be operative in district plans, we're not going to meddle with that time frame. That needs to be what it is. But there is absolutely nothing to stop a council having regard to the NPS. So we will be working with councils in terms of them operationalising it and making decisions based on the principles and what that will finally look like before it's operative in district plans. So yes, that will be a key non-monetary lever that we take to councils that we're talking to for funding.
If you don't mind, Jenna, I'll come to Jenna, then Bernard and then Justin, and then I'm going to look to then transition to some general questions. And Jenna, I'll come to you after that.
The changes to the house price caps for the first home grant, how confident are you that it's actually going to help more people? Because we've had a look at your Upper Hutt example, for example. There's only 5 houses that person can buy in Upper Hutt.
Well, of course, as we've said, this is based on the caps that we have are based on actual sales from CoreLogic data through to March 2021. But what we have to do is make sure that those caps and incomes actually still allow someone to service a mortgage. So that's one of the calculations that our team do. They make sure that with those incomes that someone is still able to service a mortgage, because what we don't want to do is create a program which means that people will be outside the affordable range. Yeah.
How much of the fund is going to be loans and how much is grants? Because a lot of the councils don't want to take the loans, they don't want to increase
grants. Yeah, there are no loans. So one of the problems we've seen with previous measures, like the Housing Infrastructure Fund, is it was aimed at councils who actually didn't have the ability to take on further debt. So this is the first time since around the 1960s or 70s the Crown has said we need to be directly involved in the funding of infrastructure if we're going to see the houses that we need built as a nation.
Little bit cheeky there, Bernard.
If these measures do actually reduce house prices, would you undo some of them to make sure that prices don't fall?
Oh, look, we need to give certainty that what we're implementing is what we're implementing, and that's today. These levers we have pulled, and they will stay in place. Okay, sorry, I said that I was going to come to Justin, and then I believe I said Janae.
If speculators are helping drive a dangerous bubble in the housing market, why not take more active measures and go specifically after speculators rather than something passive like the bright line test?
I don't think anyone who operates in this space would consider this package to be passive. I think particularly some may underestimate the impact of the interest deductibility changes. And I think you'll see from commentators who obviously are, in the field, analysing what will make a difference, that they will see that as being particularly significant. So I would never describe that package in this way.
May I make a comment
on
that?
Please.
I think over time you will see a move backwards to a higher proportion of existing homes being purchased by people who own and live in them rather than investors. That won't decrease the supply of housing for rental. And in addition to that, because we're exempting new builds, we'll be increasing supply, including in the rental market, through that change. The other point I would make, which is one that's been made to us by others, is that it's a very good time to do this with interest rates as low as they are. This is a good time to transition while interest rates are low, and therefore it will be smoother for investors than it would be at higher rates of interest rate.
Have you seen any modelling though on what those interest deductibility changes might do to rents? Because that will put pressures on landlords.
Minister Robertson.
Yeah, I mean, the issue here is that ultimately the advice. I mean, there is contestable advice about the impact in terms of renters, so let's not deny that. But ultimately, we know from our history that what happens with rents is usually a product of demand and supply. It's one of the reasons that we are exempting new builds here within these two changes we're making on the demand side, so that we can encourage more building within that market. We recognise the importance of that. We're going to continue to monitor the impact of these changes on renters, obviously, but history tells us that there are a lot of other things at play here other than just this.
So one kind of thing is, I'll just use it as an opportunity. I'll come to Janae and then I'm going to finish with Jessica. But I'll take the opportunity again to say that we have very specifically carved out from the bright line increase and from the deductibility changes, new builds. And my message to investors is, we have a need here in New Zealand. Work with us. Invest in new builds. Grow the number of houses that are being built in New Zealand. That will take pressure off the rental market, and that's, again, a key part of the way we have designed this package. Janae, then Jessica.
Why has the government not given the Reserve Bank debt-to-income tools now to give them optionality and so that they can move ahead with this sooner?
Yeah, so look, what we said when we went to the Reserve Bank was that we continue to have a concern about a blanket implementation of debt-to-income ratios on first home buyers. We've specifically asked the bank to look at their implementation with respect to investors. Ultimately, as you know, use of these kinds of macroprudential tools are a bit of a partnership between the Reserve Bank and the government. I'm now awaiting with interest the response from the Reserve Bank Governor on those matters, and then we will move forward on that, dependent on his advice.
If the Reserve Bank says their preference is to put it across both investors and owner-occupiers, as some commentary has signalled that is the Reserve Bank's preference, at that point would you say, no, sorry, RBNZ, you can't get this tool?
I'm going to wait to get the advice, but I've been pretty clear that I am concerned. I've held this concern for a number of years before I was a minister as well, about the impact that debt-to-income ratios in the market we're in at the moment would have on first home buyers. I'll obviously look at the advice that the Governor gives, but that's the position I have going into this.
Homeowners are feeling very comfortable by these buoyed house prices. Are you telling them the party's over?
No, actually, you speak to a homeowner and they're very realistic about the fact that they, of course, if they sell, they're buying in the same market. And so I think that's a reality for many, that they feel almost as if they're trapped. What they want to see is that we make sure that we are helping their children and their grandchildren get into homes, while at the same time making sure we do not see a housing bubble that bursts and cause issues for the New Zealand economy and for them.
Is this transformational?
This will make a difference. I absolutely believe that. But we're also very aware that there is no silver bullet when it comes to something as complex as a housing crisis. That is why this package is balanced and it pulls every lever that we have. All right, I'll just make sure then that we're opening up for, just aware that we've gone 40 minutes on housing. I want to give time for some general questions, given we won't have a caucus run.
Afterwards on housing?
Oh, look, I haven't actually checked whether or not, how we'll be, you will of course have them on the toll run at 2, so we will be back again at 2 o'clock.
Do you think you'll make from this package?
Oh, look, that has not been a feature at all in the design of this, and in fact, it's not been factored in for any of the forecasts for the budget. So it's not being factored in for those purposes. Okay, can I move to general? Look, so we'll be bringing Dr. Bloomfield up for a 1 o'clock update, so that any questions that you may have on that will leave to 1 o'clock.
Surely you must have something.
Well, that's the usual practice, Audrey, that we stick to, and I'm going to do that again today because he'll have much more detail at 1 o'clock for everyone. The one thing I will say is that, of course, as you've seen generally when we have, I can speak to what went out last night, but when we have someone who is connected to a managed isolation facility, we consider those to be very contained and manageable. So no expectation that any of our settings will change at this point.
Being vaccinated?
Again, I do want to leave those questions to Dr. Bloomfield in just a couple of hours. He'll go into all of the details.
Can we go back to housing then? Minister Robertson?
No, we're going to take general. Benedict.
Housing related to...
Minister Robertson?
Do I have... So, one moment. Do I have any general questions. If not, I'm going to give 3 more in housing and then we'll call it quits. Okay, Benedict.
You talked a lot about like the explosion in house prices recently. Are you worried that today's package comes too late for first home buyers?
No, I'm not. You know, it's never too late to make a difference for first home buyers to get into the market. And it's never too late to tilt that balance in their favour, and that's what we're doing.
So can I just ask for some more specificity on house prices? Because if they continue to outstrip wage growth, like that's the game and everything else is tinkering. So what is the advice on what this package should do to house prices? And when you say you want them to be sustainable, does that mean stagnant? Does that mean in line with CPI?
As I've said many times, we don't want to see this continuing rampant growth that we've had that has been driven by speculators in the market. So that is what we are trying to curb here, and that is what I believe we will see a difference over time by this package of measures. When it comes to the view of different departments, they take different perspectives depending on who they represent. And so it is fair to say that we've had a range of advice, but we believe this package has a balance of measures that will make a difference. Okay, so anyone hasn't had a second or third, then Mikey, and then I'll finish on Jenna, and that will be last call. Mikey.
Have you simply tinkered with the income and house price caps, and have you not gone far enough to lift those?
No, we haven't. You know, we went in with a very open mind about what scale of increase might make a difference there. But when you work through the calculation on the ability of someone on those incomes to service this mortgage, we have pushed it right up to the upper end of affordable. So we've moved as far as we believe we can without tipping someone into a space where they may be in a precarious situation by a mortgage they take on. And Jenna, we'll finish with you.
You've said a number of times that there is no silver bullet.
No.
Is the package here a solution to the housing crisis?
We absolutely believe that this package will make a difference. And it's because it doesn't just deal with, you know, the demand we've seen from speculators. It also supports the building of houses. Now that takes time, which is why we've got short-term measures, but also things that will make a long-term difference. Okay, thank you everyone.